I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Hope you had yourself a great week. I know I did. And what a week it was. So I was in Denver, Colorado for Commodity Classic. That was through last weekend and into Tuesday, which was a really, really interesting meeting. And then I was off to Crops Convention in Edmonton, Alberta, which was the meeting with the Canada Grains Council and the Canola Council of Canada. And they had a great agenda. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper was there, gave a great speech. I interviewed Paul Wells, who you're going to hear on today's show. Also interviewed Todd Hirsch, who's an economist. He's going to be on today's show as well. So great stuff. It was a fabulous week, and finished the week in London, Ontario. Friday night, last night, spoke to a big group of Syngenta customers from Ontario about some of the latest happenings on the political front. So it was a really fantastic week indeed. If you have any feedback on today's program, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us, of course, across social media, all the different platforms. We are Real Agriculture, or why not call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. You know, speaking of Commodity Classic, I was able to hear the address from USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins. She also did a media event, okay, which was really cool. So she gave a bit of an address to the media. There's probably, I don't know, like 30, 40 different media in the room. I'm there as well. And everyone's huddled around her. Just think like a press conference, you know, after an NHL hockey game. Everyone's huddled around, you know, Sidney Crosby or Connor McDavid, things like that. And she started to take questions. And I got one of my questions in. And you'll be proud of me, Saskatchewan, okay? My question was, you know, she had just talked about how she believes that, you know, she's concerned about farm input costs and farm profitability. So what I said was, my question was, you know, Madam Secretary, you're concerned about farmer input costs, yet at the same time, the Trump administration is talking about putting tariffs on products like potash out of Saskatchewan that is going to do nothing but increase the cost of farm inputs. And by the way, 87% of the potash that is used in the United States is coming from the province of Saskatchewan. And then she started to answer and, you know, kind of went in. And I've posted this on social media, so you can find it through the Real Agriculture handle or through myself on X, or I posted it on LinkedIn as well. And it's funny, at the end of the answer, what she did was she kind of pointed at me and said, "And I am aware of that," referencing the 87% of the potash being used in the Midwest. So it was pretty cool. It was a pretty neat week. And, yeah, it was a lot of fun at Commodity. And did a panel at Crops Convention talking about the power of trade between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S., and three experts when it comes to grain and oilseed trade around the world. That was really interesting as well. Tariffs definitely sucked up a lot of the oxygen in the room at both of those meetings, for sure, and with the farmers in Ontario on Friday night as well. Now, as I mentioned, we got David Coletto. Oh, sorry, I didn't mention that one. We got David Coletto from Abacus. We're going to talk about some of the recent polling. The Liberals are catching up. Now, he's one of the only pollsters that still has a bit of a gap. We've got Paul Wells on the Canadian political landscape. And we'll finish up today with Todd Hirsch on whether retaliatory tariffs are economically a great idea. A lot of people asking that as well. So why don't we do this? Let's take a break. And when we come back, we got David Coletto talking political polls right after this. If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters, and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
For balanced nutrition with micronutrients, the best answer is Wolftrax DDP from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how Wolftrax can ensure nutrient availability through a crop's growth cycle, visit wolftrax.ca.
One of the things that has people, audiences that I've been speaking to across Canada is somewhat, kind of maybe surprised. A little of the farming audience, I think, is a little bit surprised, but we have seen the polls really change. We've moved from a situation where, 30 days ago, it looked like a Pierre Poilievre-led Conservative Party would just walk in the next election, run away with it, a supermajority, as many have described it. Well, things have changed. And Canadians looking at Mark Carney potentially, as we're going to find out this Sunday, probably potentially the next Liberal leader. And Canadians like him as a potential foe, or I guess counter to some of the economic threats that President Donald Trump has made towards Canada. And that's over and above what they think that Pierre Poilievre could do leading the Conservative Party. Now, pretty neck and neck race, but there's one pollster that still sees a bit of a gap, and that's David Coletto of Abacus. Here's my conversation with David. I guess, where are your numbers right now? What is the gap, or is there a gap between the Conservatives and the Liberals?
So we still see a gap. Our last numbers have the Conservatives ahead by 12 points, which is, by most pollsters' count, still more favorable to the Conservatives than some other polls. Others we've seen like the Liberals ahead by 1 or within 3 or 4 points. But that doesn't change the fact that we've seen a big shift. The Liberals are up 9 points. They're at 29% nationally in the course of basically a month and a half. The Conservatives are down 5 or 6. The NDP is sinking rapidly. They're at the lowest level we have tracked their support at 14% since October of 2016. Right. So a whole bunch of things have changed in the course of 2 months where, the day that Justin Trudeau announced he was resigning, only about 12% of Canadians thought the Liberals deserved to be reelected. His negatives were as high as they've ever been. The country was just in a deep, deep funk. Fast forward to today, and the country's still in a deep, deep funk, but it's being driven less by what people think Trudeau and his government has done. And now the new villain in our story is Donald Trump and the threat that he has posed, not just with the tariffs, but just the constant musing about annexing us and making us the 51st state.
So what about Trump has pushed some Canadians towards the Liberals over the Conservatives? What are they seeing as the difference there?
Well, I think what's changed is the question a lot of voters are asking now, right? Maybe a simple way of framing it is like, what's the job we're hiring for? So before the new year, really, the job that most Canadians were hiring for was somebody who could come in and put the fire out, who could make their life more affordable, who could build more homes, who could just change direction, because people had really felt that after 10 years of a Liberal government, it was time for a change. And Pierre Poilievre was overwhelmingly the choice that people who wanted that job to be filled were thinking of. Today, the job that I think more and more people are actually thinking needs to be filled is who can help navigate, if Canada's a ship, right? Who can navigate this ship through probably the worst storm we've seen in most of our lifetimes. And that means the kinds of qualities, the experience, even the approach might be different. And so the result is, again, I still think the Conservatives are the favorites to win. I still think they're in a stronger position. But, if Mark Carney becomes prime minister, which I think he will be next week, he is opening people's minds to the idea of voting Liberal that Justin Trudeau absolutely wouldn't have, that Chrystia Freeland is not. And that's, in a way, creating a lot of uncertainty and volatility around what that next election outcome might be.
Are there certain demos of Canadians that are more inclined to be pushed in that direction?
Yeah, really fascinating is baby boomers, right? A demographic that was the least friendly to the Liberals over the last 10 years is now increasingly the one that I think might save them, frankly. And that's, I think, happening for two reasons. One is we know from our research that boomers are the demographic still most likely, Sean, to be listening to your radio show, to be watching the news on TV, and they have been consuming this constant stream of Trump news that has made them most likely to say that Trump is the top issue in the country. But at the same time, as a result of that, they've also become the most angry about all of this. They are the ones who most likely say they feel betrayed. They're the most likely to say, I'm going to boycott everything about the United States. They're probably the ones putting up Canadian flags outside their homes, in which they wouldn't have done that except for on Canada Day. And the result is that they are now much more open to voting Liberal. And I think they understand that Mark Carney is likely going to be the next leader. And even though Mark Carney's not a baby boomer, he's slightly younger, he's the most baby boomer of probably the leaders, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, boomers are like the one is the demo to watch right now. And they're the ones I think who have moved the most in the period that we're talking about.
Now, is that boomers across the country, like even Alberta and Saskatchewan?
Well, everything's relative, right? Like Alberta and Saskatchewan will always have a much lower level of support for Liberals, no matter what. Even when the party's winning big majorities, they still, will pick up only a handful of seats in Alberta and maybe none or one in Saskatchewan. But yeah, I think it's all relative. So it's kind of like rising everywhere. But what's actually interesting about Mark Carney and boomers is he's really appealing to people in Quebec. And as a Anglophone potential leader of the Liberal Party, that is something we didn't expect, because there's been some questions around his French, and the evidence so far is he's appealing to Quebecers and older Quebecers, and potentially making it hard for the Bloc Québécois even in that province to hold the support that they have.
I was just going to say that looking at some of your data provincially over the past year, that's Quebec is the province where Pierre has struggled the most, right? And so he's the one with more of the French name. He is the one that speaks very fluent French. This is it's like kind of a twist that makes it so interesting.
It does. And like even Leger, another polling company, showed that like in the days after the first tariff threats from Trump, that support for Quebec separation dropped 10 points in literally a week, right? As a signal that like even the most nationalist and separatist of Quebecers are saying, well, hold on a second, maybe at this moment, going it alone is not going to make much sense when we're up against this guy, down south. So yeah, Pierre has always had a tough time breaking through in Quebec. I think it's a historical legacy of Conservatives always struggling in that province. But I think also a little bit of reaction to some of his policies. Yeah. Frankly, like Quebecers are the most likely to care about climate change and think about sustainability and those issues at the top of kind of their list. And they're the least likely to think that Poilievre cares much about it, where that issue is not as prominent elsewhere.
I've had a number of people in the audience, provide feedback or suggestion in even some of my, presentations as of late that, I don't believe it. It's a honeymoon period. It's happened too fast. And the speed at which it has happened has people kind of doubtful. From your experience, is there any validity to that?
I think historically there is some validity to that, right? If you go back to, I was very, very young when Kim Campbell became Liberal, Conservative leader and Prime Minister, she was ahead in the polls early on, and then the result was 2 seats for the Conservatives and a complete destruction of that party. John Turner, when I was 3 years old in 1984, became Prime Minister after Pierre Trudeau, and the poll said, rebound for the Liberals. And then, Mulroney won a big majority a few months later. So those are the historical examples we have. Where I'm not certain that we should believe entirely that this is a blip, and that's a blip that's going to, or a bounce that's going to revert, is that the context is different though, right? That the crisis mentality that Trump has created in this country means that I think there's a high likelihood that a lot of voters are going to be looking at their political choices through a very different lens than if Kamala Harris was president of the United States and Justin Trudeau was still going to be prime minister in that election. And so much has changed that I think there is a chance that the Liberals could win another government, that or the Conservatives could only pull off a minority. I think I've been on your show before. Months ago, I would have guaranteed a Conservative victory. I'm far less bullish now on that outcome than I was then.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. So, what about? I just want to get back to this. All back to Donald Trump and who is the best leader to go about handling him on Canada's behalf. What are they? I get the Carney side of that potentially. What are they saying about the Pierre Poilievre side of that? What are the Conservatives doing wrong? What are the numbers showing you that they're getting? Because what I've heard is they're just going to roll over. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, let me give you an example. We asked a question on a survey a week ago, and we asked people, who do you think the leaders would have voted for if they could vote in the U.S. presidential election in November of 2024? And overwhelmingly, people thought that Trudeau and Carney and Singh would have voted for Kamala Harris. Very few thought they would have voted for Trump. But on Poilievre's front, more than half of Canadians thought he would have voted for Donald Trump, and a third thought he would have strongly supported him. And that's, I think, Poilievre's problem, right? Is that there's, prior to Trump and Trudeau resigning, the thing that held this big new coalition of Conservative supporters together was a common desire for change and a dislike for Justin Trudeau. That was the glue that held people who on a lot of other issues don't agree on things, right? Think of that core Conservative vote who voted Conservative no matter what the last three elections. And then these new voters that had voted NDP or Liberal or other parties coming over and giving it this like 45% that some polls showed they hit at the end of last year. The moment you take Trudeau out of that glue weakens. Right. And then what Trump's done is this basically imagine a wedge being shoved right into the middle of that coalition that could be shattering it, because there are people in that coalition who absolutely despise Donald Trump. And there are some in the Conservative coalition who actually like him, who like his approach. He likes his disruptiveness. And so the Conservative coalition is now fragile in a way it wasn't. And that's creating a challenge for Pierre Poilievre, because when people are asking themselves, who can handle this? It's not just that he would give in to Trump, or that because he agrees with him on some things or might share a little bit of his worldview that he's not going to defend Canada's interests. But it's more about the idea that, and you mentioned Mark Carney can say, I've done things like this before. I've led the country through the financial crisis. I led the UK's financial system through Brexit. I'm made for crises. And Poilievre can't say that yet, right? And people don't believe that. And so the dynamics have completely changed. And so again, if we think about the fact that like an election is about like hiring somebody for a job, well, the job that we're hiring for has changed, I think, for a lot of people.
Fascinating stuff. David, keep up the great work. I really do appreciate you giving us access. I know you're doing a lot of mainstream stuff all the time, more and more, and you still make time for agriculture, and I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure, Shaun. Have a great one.
That was David Coletto, CEO of Abacus Data. And again, he does see a gap. He still believes, and it's interesting, we're going to hear from Paul Wells here in a second, and he believes too, the next government will be formed by the Conservatives. But this data can change again, depending on when we have an election, right away or in the fall. The one thing is certain. This election, whenever it happens between now and October, it is a lot more interesting than maybe it was going to be at one time. We know that it is tightened up, and the Conservatives are going to have to adjust and alter their strategy, and what that strategy needs to be. Well, our next guest is going to be Paul Wells, formerly of Maclean's Magazine. Now he has a great Substack. We're going to talk to Paul Wells and find out what he thinks that strategy needs to be. You're listening to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues panel with Kelvin Hefner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
For every acre, every row, every seed, precision wins. Every time. Only Seedmaster delivers unmatched accuracy for better yields and bigger profits. Seedmaster, driven by precision, leading the way in seeding innovation. Nailed it!
Let's jump into a conversation that I had this week at Crops Convention with really very famous Canadian political commentator, Paul Wells.
I think Donald Trump has broken the Canada-U.S. relationship in a durable way. He has walked away from the terms of a trade agreement that he negotiated and signed and called the greatest trade agreement ever. Never mind what you feel about him, how can you trust any agreement with him ever again? And since the Republican Party in the States is made up of better or worse Trump imitators, how can you be sure that a president after Trump would be better? That leaves Canada facing a lot of difficult choices because trade with the United States is easier than trade with anywhere else. Military alliance with America came more automatically than military cooperation somewhere else. But I guess my message to these people was that what's happening right now is not a small thing, it's a big thing.
We seem to be focused a lot on the emotions, like the betrayal, the hurt, our feelings. And we're having, it seems like we're kind of, as a country, having a hard time getting past that. Need to think more, maybe a little bit more American, and think a little bit more about where the business side of this goes going forward. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree? I
mean, yes, I agree, but I want to give emotions a minute worth of respect. If you live in a small town, you've depended on the fire department to keep you safe for your entire life, and then one day the fire squad comes and shakes you down while your house is burning, you are within your rights to be upset. And Trump never complained about Canada until within the last year. I never complained about Canada in a sort of systematic way.
Yeah, this kind of started in early December.
Well, this is it. And it's this idea that he can take over. And he's actually got some history of taking over. He used to be a slumlord. He used to make life unlivable in apartment buildings that he wanted to buy so that the tenants would leave and he could rent out the apartments for cheaper. Like he used to sued a guy for not paying rent after the guy had paid his rent because it's unpleasant to be sued. This is the kind of stuff he does, you know? And and it's also difficult for Canada it's not obvious what to do next. Trade less with America, trade more with who? Trade more internally, getting rid of internal trade barriers, but you're not going to get a huge economic pop out of that. The studies that show significant benefit for freeing up internal trade also say that the benefit is hard to realize in the short term, that it would be gradual and over time, things like that. Trade with other parts of the world. Canada has tried, going back to Pierre Trudeau. The problem with other parts of the world is you're not as close as the Americans are. Like I spoke to canola farmers. Most of the processing and packaging of Canadian canola happens in the United States. And it makes no sense to move all that to Malaysia, you know? So like it's not obvious what the next step forward is.
What's your feeling about what's happening in Canada politically right now? We had a situation where we had Pierre Poilievre with a 20 to 25 point lead. It shrunk down to, depending on which pollster you follow. I talked to David Coletto from Abacus today. I think he said it was about a 9 or 12 point lead. He has a gap still, whereas Ledger and Nick Nanos, it's pretty much a dead heat. what do you make of this rise back of the Liberal Party and what people say will be Mark Carney?
The pollsters disagreed for a minute, and then they spent a month all agreeing, and now they're back to disagreeing. I still think that Pierre Poilievre is likely the next, going to be the Prime Minister at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
But if he's in trouble, it's because Canadians have had 3 years to get a sense of him. And some Canadians are not convinced that he's the right guy for a serious situation. Mark Carney, I think, realistically, most Canadians know very little about Mark Carney. But he knows about the world, and it's the world that's hurting us right now. And he seems serious and quiet, whereas Poilievre sometimes seems kind of cartoony and loud. And so Poilievre was a great remedy after a decade of Justin Trudeau being sanctimonious and telling you how to think and congratulating himself for stuff that he actually hadn't delivered, right? And Poilievre seemed like a reality check. But just as Trudeau has weaknesses, so does Poilievre, and Carney seems like a really good answer to some of those weaknesses. I have no idea how the next election is going to go. I have no sense of how it should go. I don't know who would form the best next government. But it must be really annoying to Poilievre to think that some people are turning back to the Liberal Party because he is so close.
It kind of within your grasp, it's just you're right there, the mouse and the cheese just the ground shifted on you.
Yeah. But Poilievre says the Prime Minister should get the provinces together to work on stuff, and I think, I have a list in my head of all the provincial premiers that he has personally insulted in crass and arrogant ways. Okay, well, if the Prime Minister is supposed to work with the premiers, is he proposing that he be the Prime Minister who works with the premiers? Because he spent 3 years not seeming like he was very interested in working with David Eby, or even with Doug Ford, or with François Legault in Quebec. So I've spent a lot of my life being a jerk. Very often you realize that you shouldn't have been. And that would be my advice to Poilievre.
Looking ahead in the future, and we don't know what the election looks like. I've had some of our audience in Alberta who have suggested, if Carney wins by Thanksgiving is the Prime Minister, it's the same group. A lot of the cabinet supported him. It's just another version of what we've had.
Yeah.
Different resume, but same version. Time to break camp and get out of here. Do you think that we could see kind of a revitalization of the Western separatist movement if Carney is the Prime Minister by Thanksgiving?
I think we certainly would. And the only question is how many friends it would have. There's substantial practical and legal challenges,
right.
But the first thing is would that be... There would certainly be people very angry if the Liberals got reelected. And I've got a lot of sympathy for that feeling. Does that translate into millions of people who want to break the country up? Is this a good time to be breaking the country up? I don't have the answer to that, and I suspect different people will have different answers.
Yeah.
So,
what else? We talked about Trump. We talked about the federal election. What else are you watching right now that interests you politically, or is these two forces taking up all the oxygen in the room?
This is most of it. I'm interested in the whole changing world. So whether Europe is able to deliver serious replacement capability to substitute for an America that doesn't want to protect Europe anymore, whether new leadership figures rise in Europe at this time. I'm probably going to cross the ocean at some point in the next month and go and poke around myself to see what I can find,
To wrap up here, we've been talking a lot about Canada needing to take action. We're really good at, talking committees, what we heard documents, restarting because it took 6 years and things may have changed, and missing the action component of that. This audience tomorrow at Crops Convention is going to hear from former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Pretty action-oriented.
Yeah.
I guess how would he fit in today's environment? And you can't talk for him, I know that, but you know the game well. What do you think?
I am sorry that I won't be here to hear Prime Minister Harper. I am a fan. I note that he was a lot quicker to express Canadian outrage at President Trump's actions than Pierre Poilievre has been. This idea, when he said Canada should pay any sacrifice, pay any cost to correct the president's actions, is that's the way that Harper talks. I don't know. If I was, so he's been leading a committee that's looking into changes to the Alberta pensions. Mm-hmm. If I was Pierre Poilievre, I mean, if I was Mark Carney and I was feeling cocky, I would suggest that I would appoint Harper ambassador to Washington or something like that. Harper's enough of a partisan that he would tell Carney to take a hike, but I think Harper represents a seriousness. He wasn't perfect. I wrote books about how he wasn't perfect, but he represents a serious that Canadians miss.
Well put. Paul, it was great to chat with you again. Keep up the great work. How do people find your Substack?
paulwells.substack.com.
Awesome stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That was my conversation with Paul Wells, formerly of Maclean's Magazine, and check out his Substack. Okay, when we come back here on RealAg on the Weekend on 650 CQM and 980 CJME, we're going to hear from Todd Hirsch, Alberta-based economist, to talk about our tariffs. A really good idea, or retaliatory tariffs, I should say, a good idea economically.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
One of the questions that I get asked a lot is, well, wait a minute here. So the U.S. puts tariffs on us in Canada. Is it really a good idea to put retaliatory tariffs on? Like, are we not just hurting ourselves? Because we're kind of arguing against ourselves because we're saying to the Americans, hey, listen, no, the consumer pays the tariff. So how are the tariffs that we're putting on the U.S., how are they hurting the U.S.? Aren't we just hurting ourselves? I posed that question to Todd Hirsch.
Not economically, to be honest. I always joke there's an economic answer and there's a political answer, and politics is always going to win. Economically, these retaliatory tariffs are going to hurt Canadian consumers far more than they're going to necessarily inflict damage on Americans. We do want to get their attention in that way, but it is creating a hardship on Canadian consumers. So economically, the very best way to deal with this would be almost to just do nothing and ignore it. Politically, that is an impossible answer. It is not possible at this point for our Prime Minister or any Premier to say, we're just going to pretend this isn't happening. Canadians want some action. They want some justice. They want to feel like we are, standing up for ourselves. So that's, I think, the rationale politically with the retaliatory tariffs.
So economically, leaving the politics aside, economically, what would be a good response?
Economically, the very best response would be do nothing, work hard to reduce interprovincial trade, which I think is maybe one of the silver linings that is coming out of this crisis, is that in Canada, our system of interprovincial trade has been embarrassingly inadequate. So if we can address that, I think also work hard to diversify our trading partners. There's a lot of other markets around the world. Sure, they're tougher to get to. There's transportation costs, there's time zones and culture and everything else. But I think that's what we need. Economically, that would be our best course of action.
Is there examples of countries you're thinking about there?
Well, you know, when I think about the United States, relatively the same size as the European Union in terms of population and economy. And also Japan. We tend to forget about Japan, a massive G7 country that seems to be completely forgotten right now in geopolitics, but a liberal democracy that holds a lot of the similar rights that Canada has. Why we're not working really hard to increase trade with them. Smaller countries like Australia, New Zealand, there's lots of other markets. Now, collectively, we'd have to be exporting to all of them to make up for the loss of the U.S. But I think it's possible and worth working towards.
You were definitely seeing a reshifting, a readjustment of trading lanes. It's something that Canada's going to have to kind of try to figure out how to deal with. And I think we're kind of in that moment of it's uncomfortable. And it creates a lot of uncertainty, a lot of risk. Trying to attract, are you at all concerned about trying to attract capital investment into the country at moments like this?
I am, because, like I said, Canada, we're not in a great spot. We find ourselves far too dependent on trade with one single trading partner, which since the end of the Second World War, or even long before that, has been a reliable trading partner. And now that has all shifted on us. So we're not in a good spot. And I do worry about, how does Canada continue to attract capital investment in an environment where there's a lot of uncertainty. But again, I think there's possible ways around it. We just have to show that we're serious about interprovincial trade, reducing those barriers, and also diversifying our trade.
I've read a lot of Scott Linscomb from the Pew Institute stuff, and one of the things that he has mentioned, who's very anti-tariff, like he hates tariffs, but one of the things that he has mentioned is that there's a significant difference between a 25% tariff and a 10% tariff. Yeah. A 10% tariff, that's like a currency fluctuation. That's, cost of goods went up. That is substantially different than a 25. Would you agree with that?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's 2.5 times worse than a 10% tariff, which, by the way, is what the president campaigned on, a universal 10% tariff. If that was what he imposed, you could at least give him credit for being consistent with what he campaigned on. But that is not what he campaigned on. He did not campaign on a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico. So, yeah, absolutely, those tariffs far worse than a 10%, but in my mind, any tariff is too much.
You think the Bank of Canada's got some cutting to do this year?
I do, simply because I think they will be responding very quickly to a softening Canadian economy. Every day these tariffs stay in place, and we have no idea, is this going to be 4 days or 4 years? But every day these tariffs stay in place is weakening for the Canadian economy. So I do think the Bank of Canada will be prepared to offer more cuts in its coming meetings.
Well, Todd, really appreciate you joining us. Hopefully it doesn't take another 10 years for us to chat. So all the best to you. Enjoy the rest of the Crops Convention.
Thanks very much, Shaun. Thanks for having me.
That was Todd Hirsch of Todd Hirsch Consulting. If you have any feedback on today's program, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, and make sure you go to realagriculture.com for all the latest in information on the industry of agriculture. Thanks for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag on the Weekend.